All right, we got to get something going.
Sudfeld play action.
There you go.
Looking down the middle of the field, and that is caught.
All right, Caden, get it.
Caden Davis, and he's off to the
See you
races.
later, bro.
No one's going to catch him.
Finally, break it
Touchdown,
open.
Lions.
Unexpected, but hey, we'll take
61 yards for Caden Davis.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
The Detroit Lions have unquestionably one of the best wide receivers in the NFL in Amon Ra St. Brown. They also have a stable of other offensive weapons, including Jamison Williams, who many expect to break out this season. But the question still remains, what do the Lions do at wide receiver 3? Welcome back to the channel. I am your host, Johnny Gaz. Thank you for returning for another video. We're going to discuss the news, notes, and updates from this week of Lions training camp, but we're also going to dive back into our Why series and discuss why the Lions may have a problem at wide receiver. Let's go. Before we talk about the pass catchers, make sure to like the video if you dig the vibe here at Johnny Gaz Sports. I'd love it if you consider subscribing to the channel. Hitting that subscription button and notify bell is the best way to make sure you don't miss any future videos. Thank you guys so much for the recent support. Make sure to comment down below on all the topics we're going to discuss here today. I love hearing from you guys. We are approaching the regular season for the Detroit Lions, and we're going to have a lot of fun exclusive content coming to the channel. Let's dive into today's topics. The Lions are coming off the last-second victory at Arrowhead in preseason week 2, of course, against the Kansas City Chiefs. They were off the several days following that preseason game, the Sunday and Monday. They resumed practice on Tuesday, August 20th. Dan Campbell had his press conference prior to practice that day and gave a lot of positive injury news. So let's go through that in some detail. The Lions are expecting Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Malcolm Rodriguez, Kevin Zeitler, Skip, all of those guys to be back either this week or after the preseason game against the Steelers. There's a small chance that defensive tackle DJ Reader is also ready after the last preseason game, but we'll kind of keep our ears to the ground on that one. Enos Rakestraw was back at practice on Tuesday, as well as Brian Branch, a full go. Terry and Arnold hopefully will be back mid-next week, but they are not concerned, according to Dan Campbell, and expect him back before week 1. And offensive lineman Christian Mahogany, the draft pick, returned to camp just last week. He is sort of working back into football shape, and Dan Campbell says he'll just need more time, but they're glad to have him back at camp. A couple new injuries to report on. The free agent linebacker Malik Jefferson, unfortunately, as well as wide receiver Traquan Smith were both placed on injured reserve following the game against Kansas City. Lions in turn signed linebacker Joel Iwabunye. I might be butchering that last name. I apologize. Originally drafted by the Bears in 2018, he did spend time in the UFL with the San Antonio Brahmas, and he was primarily a special teams player, so that's a guy they bring in as another camp body, obviously as a replacement to the linebacker they lost, and they really need to make sure they have a full roster heading into the last preseason game where we do not expect any of the starters to play. A couple other news and notes. The undrafted free agent offensive lineman Kingsley Ikwagan has been filling in for guard Kevin Zeitler, who we know has missed a lot of time this preseason. None of the starters have played, but with his built-in injury as well, he is, of course, rehabbing and trying to get back. So Ikwagan has been filling in very admirably into that role. And as an undrafted free agent, that would be a huge coup for the Lions as they build depth behind those starters on the offensive line. Tuesday's practice was really a shell practice. It was not fully padded as they sort of work into this last training camp week, heading into the game Saturday with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Wide receiver Darius Fountain and Donovan Peoples-Jones sort of had a standout day. We need to see more of those as we move throughout the last week of camp, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Motor City Dan Campbell came out and did say that as of right now, Nate Sudfeld is still quarterback 2 on the depth chart, and that really comes down to their confidence in him knowing the playbook and being able to go out there and do the things that they would need him to do in an emergency role. So again, we'll kind of see who gets the playing time ultimately in this last preseason game. I kind of expect Hendon Hooker to get the start, but we'll see how that plays out and go from there. Hutch had another big day, just appears to be hitting the next level. And again, I've had a video talking about how Aiden Hutchinson could even potentially come out and compete for Defensive Player of the Year. The more and more we hear about these sacks every single day at training camp, the more you start to think that he's taking the next step. And it's scary to think what what his next level could be, especially if the other talent that they brought in on the defensive side is able to give him the help that they were looking for. Moving into Wednesday, August 21st in the training camp, I think the biggest news coming out is the injury to Penei Sewell's foot. At the end of practice, he was seen by trainers. He was walked off the field. They did remove his shoe, his sock, and he then was taken off of the practice grounds on his own power. So we were kind of only left to speculate. Later on in the evening of the 21st, it was reported throughout the facility that he is okay. Everything is good. We didn't get much detail out of that, but that is coming out of Lions reporters. And in some interviews coming out of the end of practice, the other Lions players didn't seem overly concerned just based on what was being said there. So again, I hate to speculate, but it sounds like it is minor. I don't expect this to be a long-term thing, but again, we'll keep our ears to the ground and I will keep you posted here on the channel. Moving on, the Lions did sign nickel cornerback Rashad Wildgoose, formerly a 6th-round pick with the Buffalo Bills. He spent time with the New York Jets, Washington Commanders, then took some time away from football to spend some time making YouTube content. And now is, of course, with the Detroit Lions. Craig Reynolds also suffered an injury in Wednesday's practice, August 21st. The Lions are calling it a lower body injury, but I have not seen much detail on that. I will keep you posted. Cornerback Amik Robertson did not practice, as well as Ife Melifonwu, both with unknown reasons why they were not at practice on Wednesday the 21st. Kevin Zeitler, James Houston, Carlton Davis were back at practice in limited capacity, but good to see those guys starting to work themselves back in. This day had sort of a first-team scrimmage feel to it. A lot of the beat reporters were indicating that the defense seemed to win the day. Overall, they won the session 32-27 based on what was seen there at practice. Amon Ra St. Brown appears to look even better as he enters year 4. He continues to make plays, over 100 yards receiving. I think he had over 10 catches in this scrimmage session. So it just continues the pattern for him. It's amazing to think where he goes from here. I did a video talking about the top 10 wide receivers in Lions history, and he is already high up on that list. So go check that out if you haven't seen it already. Aleem McNeil also wreaking havoc in the middle of the defensive line there. Again, you expect him to take the next step in 2024. He already sort of broke out last year. Well, I think now with the help on the defensive line, in the defensive backfield, I really think he just continues this ascension. He is looking to get paid heading into next season, so it'll be interesting to see what his season looks like when all said and done. And Hendon Hooker had some issues taking snaps from under center, which we know at Tennessee previous to this, he didn't spend a lot of time under center. So that's just going to be a transition thing for him. It also probably doesn't help that he's taking snaps from most likely several different centers throughout camp. And that's hard to get used to. So again, we'll keep our eyes on that in the quarterback 2 battle. So do the Lions have a problem at wide receiver? I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Let's start with the terminology, because I believe there's a lot of misinformation regarding, what the X receiver, Z receiver, Y receiver is, slot, outside, ton of different ways you can look at this. And it really depends on the scheme of the offense. But let's take a little excerpt from Pride of Detroit. They go on to say, traditional terminology identifies 3 wide receivers, often lining up from left to right, as the wide receiver X, wide receiver Y, and wide receiver Z. The X tends to be a bigger-bodied outside wide receiver who can work over the middle of the field and fight for tough catches. That was the Josh Reynolds role. The Y works out of the slot on either side of the offensive line. Think Amon Ra St. Brown. And if there are 2 slot players, the second slot option is called the F. Think Khalif Raymond or Sam Laporta. The Z tends to be a speed option who can stretch the field. That's Jameson Williams, and a big play waiting to happen. So a great descriptor there of how the Lions define the X, Y, and Z position. So we'll kind of start right there. Now, I spent a ton of time in a recent video player profiling wide receiver and special team specialist Khalif Raymond. And Motor City Dan Campbell and the organization in general has a ton of faith in Khalif Raymond. They really love Leaf as a player and as a person, as a leader for this organization. So in talking about wide receiver 1, Amon Ra St. Brown, wide receiver 2, Jameson Williams, and then who falls next in line as far as, who's the man at wide receiver 3, that's Khalif Raymond. In the scheme of the depth chart, he is wide receiver 3. But in talking about the terminology of these three wide receivers, the positions, what ultimately they need to run the scheme that they're looking to run, the Lions have not been able to identify the X position wide receiver, the vacancy of Josh Reynolds, who accounted for 60 to 65 receptions last season. So where do they then make that up? Well, this offseason and in the draft, they really didn't address that directly. So I think the idea was to fill that with players that they already had on this roster. We just talked about Khalif Raymond. Well, he is a smaller, small-bodied, speed wide receiver. He's more of your Jamison Williams type, your specialty guy, what they're classifying in this terminology as the F wide receiver. He doesn't fill the role of the X. He's not a bigger-bodied guy, so he just doesn't fit the bill. So what the Lions had at camp as far as contenders was starting off, I believe, was Antoine Green, who was probably slotted into that role to start the season. Unfortunately, he had the injury, the concussion, and they had to place him on IR, so that's no longer an option. Daurice Fountain then sort of stepped into that role because he was having a hot OTA in training camp. He really was doing well for the first couple weeks. Well, that has really faded off now as we got into these first preseason games. He just hasn't shown up and shown out and shown that he can fill that role and be the guy. Ultimately, I think the Lions picked up Donovan Peoples-Jones at the end of last season in an effort to bolster their wide receiver room and maybe even having the knowledge of Josh Reynolds departing at the end of the season. I don't know that. That's my own speculation. But DPJ has that size you're looking for. He's had productive seasons in the past, especially with Cleveland. And so I think that the organization thought that he may be able to ascend into that spot. And again, another guy that just has not shown enough over the preseason and in these games to really feel like he's stepping up and taking that role. Now, the guy that I think has made the most plays, that has shown himself the most in preseason, in training camp, in these first couple games here, has been Isaiah Williams, the undrafted free agent. He's really made plays, but he is a slot receiver. Again, he's a more small-bodied speed guy, a run-after-catch type of player who may help in special teams, but really doesn't fill the X-slot receiver role. As of this recording, the Lions still have about a week left in training camp and the preseason game with the Steelers to determine if one of those contenders can ultimately step up into that role. Can Daurice Fountain or Donovan Peoples-Jones really step into wide receiver X? Or is that player outside of the organization? Dan Campbell had an interesting quote, which again was written up in the same Pride of Detroit article. He goes on to say, "These guys are here still competing, and I would say we're still looking for these guys to duke it out and see if somebody comes out of this," Campbell said of the wide receiver X position. But as with any team, we're looking all through the waiver wires, and Brad and his department are looking at everything. So we're going to find the best guy that fits us, whether it's here or somewhere else. And certainly, I'd like it to be here with these guys that have been working and giving it what they've got, and so we're going to give them an opportunity to do that. So I think that ultimately means to me he wants it to be internal, but they're not opposed to going out and getting their guy. And I think that comes after this last preseason game, if at all. Really, I believe the organization still wants Donovan Peoples-Jones to step up and be the guy. I think when all's said and done, he does end up filling that role. Now, is it the long-term solution? I don't know. And that's really the question. And that's why we talk about it today and say, do the Lions have a problem at wide receiver? Is Donovan Peoples-Jones the guy to fill that role, or do the Lions need to go out and get somebody? Let me know down in the comments. It'll be very interesting to see what they get out of it.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Do the Lions even need another X wide receiver if the guys in camp don't fill that role? If they're not willing or able to go outside of the organization and bring somebody in, do the Lions even need someone? We talked about the stable of offensive weapons that already exist in the Ben Johnson Lions offense. Can the tight end step into that role? We know what Sam Laporta can give. We know what the Lions value in Brock Wright. And they have several guys even behind them that ultimately could be the big-bodied receiver that they need in those situations. Could the running back step into that role? Monty and, of course, Jahmyr Gibbs, which we know has seen a lot of time in the preseason, getting more reps in the receiver slot. You know, building the hands and route tree to be able to add to his skill set. So in the end, do the Lions even need that X receiver? Can Ben Johnson and the offense fill that role with the pieces that they already have available to them? let me know down in the comments. I'm really interested to see what you guys think. You know, nitpicking this particular position is fun. In the past, we've looked at this a lot differently. So the fact that we're talking about positions 3, 4, and 5, or the fact that they got to fill a next wide receiver means we're sitting in a good spot. It was really good news later on in the day today, hearing that hopefully Penei Sewell's injury is nothing serious. So I'll keep you posted on that one. If you dig the vibe here at Johnny Gas Sports, make sure to hit that like button, the subscription button, and notify bell are there for you so you don't miss any future videos coming up here on the channel. If you're interested in getting more involved, hit that join button. I'll give you all the options you have to become a part of the family. More than anything else, make sure to take care of yourself and your mental health. That is the most important thing. I want to make sure you guys come back and see me on future videos. Thank you so much for your time. Have an excellent day.
It sound right, boy.